The tray in Lena Marchetti's hands trembled the moment she felt eyes on her back, and she had not even turned around yet to know whose eyes they were. The restaurant was called Verona Hall, a tall glass building near the river where the city's richest men came to eat quietly and talk about things that were never written down. Lena had worked there for 11 months, long enough to know which tables asked no questions and which tables you did not linger near for too long. Tonight she had 6 tables, 2 large parties, and a headache that had started an hour into her shift and refused to leave. She was 24 years old, with dark brown hair pulled back into a tight bun that never seemed to survive past 9 in the evening, and a face that customers often called kind, though kindness had very little to do with why she kept this job. She needed the money. Her younger brother Toby was 17 and still in school, and their mother had been gone for 3 years now, leaving Lena as the only person standing between Toby and a life that could easily fall apart. Every shift, every tip, every extra hour mattered. The trouble started at table 14, the private booth near the back that the staff had learned never to approach unless called. Tonight it held one man. He sat alone, which was unusual, dressed in a dark gray suit that looked like it cost more than Lena made in 6 months. His hair was black, combed back neatly, and his eyes moved slowly around the room the way a man's eyes move when he is used to being the most dangerous person in it. Nobody at Verona Hall said his name out loud. They called him only the guest, and when he arrived, the manager, a nervous man named Gerald Whitfield, always personally checked that everything was perfect before allowing any server near him. Tonight, Gerald had assigned Lena to table 14 because the usual server was out sick, and there had been no time to find a replacement. Gerald had pulled her aside near the kitchen doors, his voice low and urgent. "You do not speak unless spoken to," he told her. "You do not linger. You bring the food, you bring the wine, and you leave. Do you understand me?" Lena had nodded, though her stomach had tightened into a small, hard knot. She had heard the whispers among the other servers, the way they lowered their voices whenever that booth was mentioned, the way one of the older waiters, a man named Harold, had once said that the guest was connected to people who made problems disappear, and sometimes made people disappear too. Lena did not know if any of it was true. She only knew that her hands were shaking as she carried the first course toward the booth. He did not look up when she set the plate down. She placed it gently, careful not to make a sound, and stepped back the way Gerald had instructed. It was only as she turned to leave that the restaurant's sound system, usually so carefully controlled, glitched for a moment. The soft background music that had been playing all night, something quiet and forgettable, cut out entirely, and for 3 full seconds there was nothing but silence in the dining room. Then, without warning, an old song began to play, loud and bright, completely wrong for the mood of the restaurant. It was a song Lena knew. It was a song her mother used to play in their kitchen on Sunday mornings, the kind of song that made her body move before her mind had time to stop it. She was halfway back toward the kitchen, carrying an empty tray, when her feet betrayed her. For just a moment, no more than a few seconds, her hips swayed to the rhythm, her free hand lifted slightly, and she let out a small, quiet laugh at herself, the kind of laugh a person makes when they catch themselves doing something silly and human in a place that demanded neither. It was nothing, really. A flicker of a girl who still remembered how to enjoy a song, even while balancing plates in a room full of men who did not smile. She did not know that the guest at table 14 had looked up. She did not know that his eyes, which rarely settled on anyone for more than a passing second, had stayed fixed on her the entire time, watching the way her body moved without permission, the way her laugh had escaped before she could stop it. She did not know that for a man who spent every hour of his life controlling every detail around him, watching people who could not stop performing for him, this small, unguarded moment had struck him like nothing had in a very long time. The music corrected itself as quickly as it had glitched, snapping back to the quiet, forgettable song from before. Lena straightened immediately, embarrassed, glancing around to see if anyone had noticed. A few tables had, and some smiled politely, amused by the small break in the evening's formality. She did not look toward table 14. She did not dare. She finished her shift the way she always did, moving from table to table, refilling glasses, clearing plates, smiling when her feet ached and her head pounded. By the time midnight arrived and the last guests began to leave, she had entirely forgotten the strange moment with the music, pushed it down beneath the exhaustion of a long night. She clocked out at 12:15, said goodnight to Gerald, who barely looked up from his clipboard, and walked out into the cold air toward the bus stop 3 blocks away. She did not see the black car parked across the street. She did not see the man inside it, a tall figure named Victor Castellano, who watched her walk past with careful, patient eyes, then lifted a phone to his ear and said only 3 words before ending the call. She is leaving. Inside Verona Hall, the guest at table 14 remained seated long after the other patrons had gone. Gerald hovered nearby, refilling his water glass with hands that were not entirely steady, waiting for any sign that something was wrong, that some mistake had been made, that punishment was coming for a failure he could not name. "Is everything to your satisfaction, sir?" Gerald asked, his voice carefully controlled. The man did not answer right away. He was still thinking about the girl with the tray, the way she had moved without thinking, the way her laugh had sounded genuinely happy in a room where happiness was rare and often fake. In his world, everyone performed for him. Everyone smiled the smile they thought he wanted to see, spoke the words they thought would keep them safe, hid whatever they truly felt behind careful masks. He had grown so used to this performance that he had almost forgotten what it looked like when someone forgot to perform at all. "Who was the girl serving this table?" he finally asked. Gerald blinked, caught off guard. "Her name is Lena, sir. Lena Marchetti. She is not usually assigned to this section. I can assure you it will not happen again." "No," the man said quietly. "It will happen again. I want her assigned to this table every time I come here." Gerald's mouth opened slightly, confusion flickering across his face before he caught himself and nodded quickly. "Of course, sir. Whatever you wish." The man rose from his seat, buttoning his jacket with slow, deliberate movements. His name, though few dared to say it inside these walls, was Dominic Rossi, and in this city his name carried a weight that made grown men lower their eyes and cross to the other side of the street. He had built his position through years of careful calculation, eliminating rivals, controlling every corner of a world that ran on fear and loyalty in equal measure. He trusted almost no one. He had learned long ago that trust was a door that, once opened, could never be fully closed again, and every person who had ever tried to walk through it with him had eventually betrayed him in some way, large or small. And yet, as he walked toward the exit, his mind kept returning to the girl with the tray, to the 3 seconds of unguarded joy on her face, to the sound of her laugh, soft and real, cutting through a room full of careful silence. He did not understand why it mattered so much. He only knew that it did. Outside, Victor was waiting by the car, holding the door open. Dominic slid into the back seat, and Victor closed the door before walking around to the driver's side. "Where to, boss?" Victor asked once he was seated. Dominic did not answer immediately. He looked out the window at the restaurant behind them, its windows glowing warm and gold against the dark street. "Find out everything about her," he said finally. "Where she lives, who she is close to, what she needs." Victor's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, studying his boss's reflection for a moment longer than necessary. In all his years working for Dominic Rossi, he had never once heard him ask for information about a waitress, a stranger, someone with no connection to the business, no debt owed, no threat posed. This was new. This was different. "Understood," Victor said simply, and started the engine. As the car pulled away from the curb, Lena was 3 blocks away, standing at the bus stop in the cold, rubbing her hands together for warmth, her mind already moving toward home, toward Toby, toward the pile of bills waiting on the kitchen table. She had no idea that somewhere behind her, a man capable of reshaping entire lives with a single word had just decided that hers was about to change. The bus arrived 7 minutes late, as it always did on Tuesday nights, and Lena climbed aboard, dropping into a seat near the back window. She watched the city lights blur past, thinking about nothing in particular, thinking about everything at once, the way exhausted people often do at the end of a long shift. She thought about the strange moment with the music, and despite herself, she smiled faintly at the memory, embarrassed but not entirely sorry it had happened. She did not know that her photograph, taken quietly by a man standing across the street with a phone camera, was already being sent to an address she had never heard of. She did not know that within hours, more information about her life, her brother, her apartment, her daily routine would be gathered and placed on a desk belonging to a man whose attention was not easily earned, and whose attention, once given, was rarely withdrawn. She only knew that she was tired, that her feet hurt, that Toby had probably left dishes in the sink again, and that tomorrow she would wake up and do it all over again. The same shift, the same tables, the same careful, invisible life she had built for herself out of necessity. She had no way of knowing that invisible was the one thing she was no longer going to be allowed to remain. The bus rolled deeper into the quiet part of the city, past closed shops and dim streetlights, carrying her home to a life she believed was still entirely her own. Behind her, in the dark car moving in the opposite direction, a man who ruled half the city through fear had just made a decision that would pull her directly into the center of a world she had spent her whole life trying to avoid. Neither of them yet understood how far that decision would carry them, or how quickly the quiet life Lena had built would begin, piece by piece, to come apart. Lena got off the bus at her usual stop and walked the last 2 blocks to her apartment building, her breath forming small clouds in the cold night air. The building was old, the paint peeling near the entrance, the hallway light on the second floor flickering the way it had for months, though the landlord always promised to fix it and never did. She climbed the stairs slowly, her legs heavy from standing all night, and let herself into the small apartment she shared with Toby. The television was on low in the living room, throwing pale blue light across the walls. Toby was asleep on the couch, a textbook open on his chest, one earbud still in his ear. Lena stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him, feeling the familiar mixture of exhaustion and love that came with being the only adult left in his life. He looked younger when he slept, less like the almost grown young man he was becoming, and more like the boy she remembered from years before, when their mother was still alive, and the 3 of them used to eat dinner together at a table that now felt far too big for just the 2 of them. She crossed the room quietly and gently pulled the earbud from his ear, then nudged his shoulder. "Hey," she said softly, "go to bed properly. You will wake up with a sore neck." Toby stirred, blinking up at her with tired eyes. "What time is it?" he mumbled. "Late," she said. "Go." He sat up slowly, rubbing his face, and glanced at her with the kind of half-awake concern only a younger sibling could manage. "You look tired," he said. "Bad night?" "Long night," she corrected, forcing a small smile. "Nothing I cannot handle." Toby did not push further. He never did, not because he did not care, but because he understood, in the quiet way children who grow up too fast often understand, that his sister carried enough weight already without him adding to it. He gathered his textbook and shuffled off toward his room, mumbling a good night over his shoulder. Lena watched him go, then sank onto the couch herself, too tired to move any further just yet. She pulled her phone from her pocket and checked the time. Nearly 1 in the morning. In 5 hours she would need to be up again, preparing breakfast, making sure Toby left for school on time, before catching the early bus back toward the restaurant for the lunch shift. It was a cycle that repeated itself day after day, exhausting but familiar, the kind of life that asked nothing of her except everything, every single day, without pause. She thought again, briefly, about the strange moment at the restaurant, the way the music had caught her off guard, the way she had let herself move without thinking. She wondered, with a small flicker of embarrassment, whether the man at table 14 had noticed. She hoped he had not. In a place like Verona Hall, drawing attention to yourself was rarely a good thing, especially not from a man the entire staff spoke of only in careful whispers. She had no way of knowing that, at that very moment, across the city in an office on the top floor of a building that bore no sign and no name on its directory, a folder was already being prepared with her photograph clipped to the front page. The office belonged to Dominic Rossi, though few people beyond his closest circle had ever set foot inside it. It sat above a shipping company that served as one of many legitimate businesses, shielding operations far less legitimate underneath. The room was sparse, deliberately so, containing only a large desk, 2 chairs, and a wall of windows overlooking the dark river below. Dominic stood at those windows now, his jacket removed, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, staring out at the city lights, while Victor waited near the door, with a folder in his hands. "You have something for me already," Dominic said without turning around. Victor stepped forward and placed the folder on the desk. Not everything, but enough to start. Her name is Lena Marchetti, 24 years old. She lives with her younger brother, Toby, 17. Their mother passed 3 years ago. No father in the picture, hasn't been since the boy was young. She works 2 jobs, the restaurant and weekend shifts at a small bakery near their apartment. No debts to anyone connected to us. No family ties to any of the other operations in the city. She is, as far as I can tell, exactly what she appears to be. Nobody. Dominic finally turned from the window, his expression unreadable. Nobody, he repeated quietly, as though testing the word, finding it did not fit quite right in his mouth. That is rare in this city. It is, Victor agreed carefully. Which is why I have to ask, boss. Why does she matter? Dominic did not answer right away. He walked to the desk, picked up the folder, and studied the single photograph clipped inside, the one taken from across the street as she waited for the bus. Even in the grainy image, something about her posture, the tired set of her shoulders, the small, defiant tilt of her chin, held his attention in a way he could not fully explain, even to himself. "She danced tonight," he said finally, "in the middle of the restaurant. For 3 seconds, in front of everyone, she forgot to be careful." Victor waited, unsure what to say to that. "Do you understand what that means?" Dominic continued, setting the folder down. "Every person who works for me, every person who sits across from me at a table, every person who has ever asked me for a favor, performs. They smile because they think it will keep them safe. They agree with everything I say because disagreement feels dangerous. Nobody around me has forgotten how to perform in years, Victor. Nobody except, apparently, a waitress who did not even know I was watching." Victor nodded slowly, beginning in some small way to understand. "And what do you want done with this information?" he asked. "Nothing dangerous," Dominic said, his voice firm. "I do not want her followed beyond what is necessary to keep her safe. I do not want her frightened. I do not want anyone from our world getting near her, unless I decide it. Do you understand me?" "I understand," Victor said. "Good," Dominic replied, turning back toward the window, back toward the dark water and the scattered lights of a city that answered to him in ways most of its residents would never fully understand. "Because I intend to see her again." Behind him, Victor said nothing, though privately he found himself wondering what kind of storm was beginning to gather, quietly and without warning, around a young woman who had done nothing more than let a song move her feet for a few unguarded seconds on an ordinary Tuesday night. He had worked for Dominic Rossi for nearly a decade, had seen him make ruthless decisions without hesitation, had watched him dismantle entire operations without a flicker of doubt crossing his face. He had never once seen him look the way he looked now, standing at that window, staring out at a city that suddenly seemed to hold something in it worth more than power. Far across town, Lena finally climbed into bed, pulling the blanket up to her chin, her mind already drifting toward sleep, toward the quiet relief of a few short hours before the alarm would ring again. She had no reason to believe that tomorrow would be any different from today, any different from the hundreds of ordinary days that had come before it. She did not yet know that somewhere in the city, a decision had already been made that would ensure tomorrow would be nothing like today at all. The knock on the apartment door came at exactly 7 in the morning, sharp and unfamiliar, cutting through the quiet routine of a household that never received visitors this early. Lena froze in the kitchen, a spatula still in her hand, eggs sizzling in the pan behind her. Toby looked up from his cereal bowl, his eyebrows raised in silent question. Nobody they knew ever knocked before 8. Nobody they knew ever knocked at all. Not really. Not since their mother had died and the small circle of family friends had slowly drifted away, the way people often do when there is grief involved and nobody quite knows what to say anymore. Lena wiped her hands on a towel and crossed to the door, glancing through the small peephole before opening it. A man stood in the hallway, tall and composed, wearing a suit that looked far too expensive for their building's cracked hallway tiles and flickering light. She did not recognize him, though something about his calm, unreadable expression made her stomach tighten instinctively. "Can I help you?" she asked carefully, opening the door only partway. The man offered a polite, practiced smile. "Miss Marchetti," he said, "my name is Victor. I work for a private hospitality group that manages several properties across the city. We are reaching out because a position has opened at one of our locations, and your name came up as someone with strong experience and excellent reviews from your current employer." Lena blinked, caught completely off guard. "I did not apply anywhere," she said slowly. "No," Victor agreed easily. "We do occasionally recruit directly when we are looking for someone specific. The position pays significantly more than standard restaurant work, includes benefits, and the schedule is far more predictable. I understand that might sound unusual, coming to your door like this, but I promise you it is a legitimate opportunity." Behind her, Toby had abandoned his cereal entirely and was now standing in the kitchen doorway, listening with obvious curiosity. Lena felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle over her, the constant calculation of risk against reward that came with being the only person keeping their small household from falling apart. More money would mean less worry. Less worry would mean more time for Toby, more stability, maybe even enough saved to help him with college applications in another year. And yet something about the visit felt wrong, too smooth, too convenient, arriving less than 12 hours after the strange moment at Verona Hall the night before. She pushed the thought aside, telling herself she was simply tired and overly cautious after a long shift. "I would need details," she said carefully. "Where exactly? What the pay is? What the hours look like?" Victor reached into his jacket and produced a simple white card, offering it to her with both hands, a small gesture of respect that somehow made him seem even more unsettling. "Everything is here," he said. "The address, the contact information, the starting salary. Come by this afternoon if you are interested. There is no pressure either way." Lena took the card, glancing down at the elegant, simple print. "The Aldridge," it read, along with an address in a part of the city she rarely visited, a district full of restored old buildings and quiet, expensive restaurants that catered to people whose names never appeared in ordinary news. "Thank you," she said, still uncertain. Victor nodded once, then turned and walked back down the hallway without another word, his footsteps unhurried, disappearing down the stairwell before Lena had even fully closed the door. "Who was that?" Toby asked immediately, abandoning any pretense of finishing his breakfast. "I do not know," Lena admitted, turning the card over in her fingers. "Some kind of job offer, I think." "That is weird," Toby said bluntly. The honesty of a 17-year-old cutting straight through any doubts Lena might have tried to talk herself out of. People do not just show up at your door with job offers. That only happens in movies, or in situations you should probably stay away from. Lena managed a small laugh despite herself, setting the card down on the counter. "I know how it looks," she said, "but we could use the money, Toby. You know that better than anyone." Toby studied her for a long moment, his expression caught between concern and the reluctant understanding of a boy who had grown up watching his older sister sacrifice piece after piece of her own life to keep theirs together. "Just be careful," he said finally. "Whatever it is." She promised she would be, though even as the words left her mouth, she was not entirely certain she believed them herself. That afternoon, after finishing an early lunch shift at Verona Hall, Lena found herself standing outside the Aldridge, staring up at a building unlike anything she had worked in before. It rose 10 stories above the street, its exterior a mixture of dark stone and gleaming glass. The entrance flanked by 2 tall doors that opened automatically as she approached, revealing a lobby so polished and quiet that her worn work shoes felt suddenly, painfully out of place against the marble floor. A woman at the front desk greeted her with practiced warmth, checking a tablet before directing her toward a private elevator that carried her up to the 4th floor, where a private dining lounge occupied nearly the entire wing. The space was breathtaking, all soft lighting and rich fabric, the kind of place Lena had only ever seen in photographs, and she found herself gripping the strap of her bag a little tighter as she stepped out of the elevator. Victor was waiting for her. "Miss Marchetti," he said warmly, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming." She shook it, still uncertain, glancing around the empty lounge. "There is nobody here," she said. "We are not open to the public until evening," Victor explained smoothly. "This allows me to show you the space properly, without the noise of service getting in the way." He led her through the lounge, pointing out the details, the private booths reserved for clients who valued discretion above all else, the small stage where a pianist performed most evenings, the kitchen, visible through a glass wall, where chefs moved with quiet, practiced precision. He explained the position, a senior server role with responsibilities far beyond simply carrying plates, including managing a small section of the most valued clientele, people whose comfort and privacy were treated as the highest priority in the building. The pay he mentioned made Lena's breath catch slightly in her throat, nearly double what she currently earned, along with health benefits and a schedule that would allow her far more predictable hours than the chaotic shifts at Verona Hall. "This seems like a lot for a server position," she said carefully, watching Victor's face for any sign of hesitation or dishonesty. "Our clients are particular about who serves them," Victor replied simply. "We pay accordingly for staff who understand discretion and professionalism. You come highly recommended." "Recommended by whom?" Lena asked. For the first time, something flickered behind Victor's careful expression, something he smoothed over quickly with another practiced smile. "By people who have seen you work," he said simply. "That is all I am able to share for now." Lena considered pressing further, but something in his tone told her the conversation would go no further in that direction, no matter how many times she asked. She glanced around the lounge once more, weighing the strange unease sitting in her stomach against the very real, very practical needs waiting for her at home. "Can I think about it?" she asked finally. "Of course," Victor said. "Take whatever time you need. Though I should mention, positions like this rarely stay open for long." She left the Aldridge 20 minutes later, walking slowly back toward the bus stop, her mind spinning with questions she could not quite answer. Something about the entire situation felt orchestrated, as though she had been led carefully down a path someone else had already mapped out for her, though she could not begin to guess who or why. She did not know that, 3 floors above the lounge where she had just stood, Dominic Rossi had watched the entire meeting through a discreet camera feed, studying her reactions, the careful way she asked questions, the honest uncertainty on her face when Victor avoided giving her a full answer. He found himself leaning forward in his chair without realizing it, more invested in the outcome of this small negotiation than he had been in decisions worth considerably more money. "She is cautious," he said quietly to Victor, who had joined him after Lena's departure. "That is good. It means she is smart enough to notice when something does not add up." "She asked who recommended her," Victor said. "I did not give her an answer." "Good," Dominic replied. "Not yet." Victor hesitated before speaking again, choosing his words carefully. "Boss," he said, "if she takes the job, she will be here regularly. She will see things, hear things. People will talk, eventually, about who really owns this building, who really pays her salary. Are you prepared for that?" Dominic did not answer immediately. He rose from his chair and walked to the window overlooking the street below, watching Lena's small figure grow smaller as she walked away, unaware of how closely she had just been watched, unaware of how carefully her entire path forward was already being arranged. "I am prepared to protect her from anything that world brings near her," he said finally. "That is different from being prepared to keep her from ever finding out what that world is." Victor said nothing, though the weight of his boss's words settled heavily in the quiet room. In all his years working alongside Dominic Rossi, he had never once seen him speak about protecting someone who was not already bound to him through blood, loyalty, or fear. This was something else entirely, something neither of them yet had a name for. That evening, Lena sat at her kitchen table long after Toby had gone to bed, the white card from the Aldridge resting beside her laptop as she searched for any information she could find about the building, the company that owned it, the mysterious client base Victor had described. She found almost nothing, only a handful of vague articles describing the Aldridge as an exclusive private venue, along with a short list of registered business owners that led, after several confusing turns, to holding companies whose names meant nothing to her. She closed the laptop eventually, rubbing her tired eyes, torn between caution and the undeniable pull of an opportunity that could change everything for her and Toby. She thought about her mother, about the promise she had made at her bedside years ago to always take care of her brother, no matter what it cost her. She thought about the exhaustion of working 2 jobs, the constant math of bills against income that never seemed to balance the way it should. By the time she finally went to bed, she had made her decision, though a small, quiet voice in the back of her mind continued to whisper that some decisions, once made, could never fully be undone. She would call Victor in the morning. She would accept the job. She had no way of knowing that in doing so, she was stepping directly into the orbit of a man capable of reshaping the entire city with a single word. A man who had already decided, quietly and completely, that he had no intention of letting her walk back out again. Her first shift at the Aldridge began 3 days later, on a Friday evening, when the lounge filled slowly with guests who spoke in low, measured voices and tipped their staff with a generosity that still felt slightly unreal to her. A senior server named Priscilla walked her through the routines, explaining which booths belonged to which regular clients, which faces she should learn quickly, and which questions she should never, under any circumstances, ask. "You will notice some guests come with security," Priscilla explained quietly as they folded napkins near the service station. "You treat them exactly the same as everyone else. Polite, efficient, invisible when they want you to be. You do not stare. You do not ask who they are. You especially do not repeat anything you overhear at their tables." Lena nodded, filing the instructions away carefully, though a small knot of unease continued tightening in her stomach with every passing hour. The lounge itself was beautiful, more beautiful than anywhere she had ever worked, but there was an undercurrent running beneath its polished surface that she could not quite name, a tension in the air whenever certain guests arrived, a way the other staff seemed to straighten their posture and lower their voices without anyone needing to tell them to. It was nearly 9 in the evening when he walked in. Lena recognized him instantly, the dark gray suit replaced tonight by a deep charcoal one, the same composed, unreadable expression she remembered from Verona Hall. Her stomach dropped as understanding clicked into place, piece by piece, faster than she could stop it. The man from table 14. The man who had watched her dance without her knowledge. The reason, she now realized with growing certainty, that Victor had appeared at her door only days after that strange, unguarded moment. Priscilla touched her arm gently, steering her toward the back of the lounge. "That is Mr. Rossi," she said quietly, her voice carrying a reverence Lena had not heard her use for any other guest. "He owns this building. He owns several buildings, actually. You will not be serving his table tonight. Someone more senior handles his section. Lena said nothing, though her mind raced, connecting every strange detail from the past week into a picture she was only beginning to understand. She spent the rest of the evening watching him from a careful distance, noting the quiet respect with which every member of the staff treated him, the way conversations seemed to pause slightly whenever he moved through the room, the way even the pianist adjusted his playing when Dominic Rossi settled into his usual booth near the tall windows overlooking the river. It was nearly closing time when he finally approached her directly. Lena was clearing glasses from an empty table when she became aware of him standing several feet away, watching her with the same quiet, unreadable focus she remembered from that first night. She straightened immediately, smoothing her apron, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. "Mr. Rossi," she said carefully, "is there something I can help you with?" "You have questions," he said simply, his voice low and even. "I would rather you ask them than carry them around all night." She hesitated, glancing toward the kitchen where Priscilla was watching with poorly concealed curiosity. "Did you arrange this?" she asked finally. "The job offer, Victor showing up at my apartment, all of it." "I did," Dominic answered, without hesitation or apology. "Why?" she asked, the single word carrying more weight than she intended. He considered the question for a long moment, his gaze steady on hers in a way that made it difficult for her to look away. "Because you were the first person I had seen in a very long time who was not performing for anyone," he said finally. "That is rare in my world, Miss Marchetti. Rarer than you might imagine." Lena did not know how to respond to that, the honesty of it catching her completely off guard. "I did not ask to be noticed," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. "That is precisely why I noticed." He left shortly after that, offering nothing more than a brief nod before walking toward the private elevator, leaving Lena standing alone among the empty glasses, her mind spinning with questions that had only multiplied rather than settled. She did not know what to make of a man who commanded such quiet, absolute respect from everyone around him, yet had gone out of his way to explain himself to a waitress he had barely spoken to. Word of the brief exchange spread quickly through the staff by the following week, whispered carefully between shifts, though nobody dared bring it up directly in front of Lena herself. She noticed the change regardless, the way certain staff members began treating her with a cautious deference she had not earned through experience or seniority, the way Priscilla occasionally studied her with an expression that mixed curiosity and something close to concern. Elsewhere in the city, in circles far removed from the quiet elegance of the Aldridge, other people had begun noticing the change as well. A rival organization, led by a man named Anthony Ferraro, had spent years watching for any sign of weakness in Dominic Rossi's carefully guarded operation, any crack that might finally offer an opportunity to shift the balance of power that had held steady across the city for nearly a decade. Whispers of a waitress who had somehow caught Dominic's attention, who now worked in his most private establishment, reached Ferraro's ears within days, carried by informants paid well to notice exactly this kind of unusual detail. A woman, Ferraro repeated slowly, seated in his own dim office across town, turning the information over carefully in his mind. "Rossi has never once shown interest in anyone outside his organization. Not in 10 years. Everyone makes exceptions eventually," replied the man seated across from him, a wiry, careful associate named Gareth Price. "Even men like Rossi." Ferraro said nothing for a long moment, a slow, calculating smile spreading across his face as new possibilities began forming in his mind, possibilities that had not existed a week earlier, before a waitress had let herself dance for 3 unguarded seconds in a restaurant she had no idea was being watched. "Find out everything about her," Ferraro said finally. "Everything. If Rossi has finally found something he cares about protecting, then we have finally found something worth taking away from him." Back at the Aldridge, unaware of the quiet storm now gathering around her, Lena continued settling into her new position, growing gradually more comfortable with the rhythms of the lounge, the particular guests, the careful discretion the job demanded. She told herself, night after night, that the strange conversation with Dominic Rossi had been a single unusual moment, unlikely to repeat itself, unlikely to mean anything beyond the mystery of a powerful man's passing curiosity. She did not yet understand that somewhere across the city, her name had already become a target, whispered between men who understood only one language, the language of leverage, and that the quiet, careful world she had just stepped into was far more dangerous than she could have possibly imagined. 3 weeks into her new position, Lena noticed the same black car parked across from the Aldridge almost every night, and told herself it meant nothing, until the night it followed her bus halfway home before disappearing at the last intersection before her stop. She did not mention it to anyone at first, not even Toby, though she found herself glancing over her shoulder more often, checking the street before crossing, memorizing the faces of strangers who lingered a little too long near her building's entrance. She told herself she was imagining things, that the stress of her new job, the strange, careful world of the Aldridge, was simply making her paranoid about things that had always been there, unnoticed, before she had any reason to look for them. Her work at the lounge had settled into a rhythm she almost enjoyed, despite the constant undercurrent of tension running beneath every polished surface. Dominic Rossi came in most evenings now, always seated in the same private booth, always greeted with the same quiet reverence by the rest of the staff. He rarely spoke to her directly during service, maintaining a careful, professional distance that somehow felt more charged than any conversation might have been. But there were moments, small and easy to miss if you were not paying close attention, when their eyes would meet across the room, when he would linger a beat longer than necessary as she cleared a nearby table, when the careful mask he wore for everyone else seemed to soften slightly whenever she was near. It was on a quiet Tuesday, the lounge nearly empty due to a sudden storm keeping most guests home, that he finally spoke to her again, in more than passing pleasantries. "You are working too many hours," he said, without preamble, as she refilled his water glass. Lena glanced up, surprised. "I need the hours," she said simply. "It is not your concern. Everything that happens under this roof is my concern," he replied, though his tone carried none of the coldness the words might have suggested elsewhere. "Sit down for a moment. The lounge is empty. Nobody will mind." She hesitated, glancing toward the kitchen, where Priscilla was occupied restocking supplies, entirely unaware of the quiet conversation unfolding at booth number 1. Slowly, cautiously, Lena lowered herself into the seat across from him, feeling strangely exposed despite the empty room around them. "Why does it matter to you how many hours I work?" she asked finally. Dominic considered the question carefully before answering, the way he seemed to consider everything, weighing each word before allowing it out into the world. "Because exhaustion makes people careless," he said, "and carelessness, in my world, gets people hurt." "I am not part of your world," Lena said quietly, though even as she spoke the words, she was beginning to understand how untrue that statement had already become. "Not yet," he agreed, "but you work in my building. You know my face. Some people in this city would consider that enough of a connection to cause you harm, whether either of us wanted that or not." The words settled heavily between them, and for the first time since she had started working at the Aldridge, Lena felt the full weight of what she had stepped into, the careful, dangerous machinery operating just beneath the polished surface of her new life. "Are you telling me I am in danger?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "I am telling you to be careful," Dominic replied. "I am telling you that if anything ever feels wrong, if you notice anyone watching you, following you, asking questions about your life that they should not be asking, you come to me directly. Not to Victor, not to Priscilla, to me." Lena studied him for a long moment, searching his careful, controlled expression for some sign of exaggeration, some hint that he was simply testing her reaction for reasons she could not yet understand. She found none. Only a quiet, absolute seriousness that unsettled her more than any direct threat could have. "There has been a car," she admitted finally, the words slipping out before she had fully decided to share them. "Parked outside some nights. I thought I was imagining it." Something shifted in Dominic's expression, subtle but unmistakable, a tightening around his eyes that spoke of controlled anger rather than surprise. "Describe it," he said, his voice dropping into a tone she had not heard from him before, low and hard. She described what little she remembered, the color, the general shape, the two occasions she had noticed it most clearly. Dominic listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening slightly with every detail, and when she finished, he reached for his phone without a word, typing a brief message before setting it back down. "I want you to change your route home tonight," he said. "Victor will drive you." "I do not need—" "You do," he interrupted gently but firmly. "Not because I am asking you to depend on me, Lena. Because someone is watching you, and until I understand why, I am not willing to let you walk home alone through it." She wanted to argue, wanted to insist on her own independence the way she always had. The careful self-reliance she had built out of necessity over years of taking care of herself and Toby, without anyone else's help. But something in his voice, something beneath the calm authority he carried everywhere, told her this was not a moment for pride. "All right," she said quietly. "Victor can drive me." That night, as Victor's car wound through quieter streets on the way to her apartment, Lena sat in the back seat, watching the city lights pass, turning the conversation over and over in her mind. She thought about the careful concern in Dominic's voice, so different from the controlled, distant man everyone else seemed to see. She thought about the black car, about the strange, unsettling sensation of being watched by someone she could not name. She did not know that, less than a mile behind Victor's car, another vehicle followed at a careful distance, its driver reporting quietly by phone to a man named Gareth Price, who in turn reported everything back to Anthony Ferraro, who was slowly, patiently assembling a plan that had very little to do with business rivalries and everything to do with the one weakness Dominic Rossi had never before shown. Back at the Aldridge, after Lena had gone, Dominic remained in his office long into the night, reviewing security footage from the surrounding streets, cross-referencing license plates against every database his organization had access to. Victor joined him eventually, dropping into the chair across from the desk with the particular weariness of a man who had spent the evening navigating quiet streets while watching every mirror for signs of pursuit. "The car peeled off 2 blocks from her building," Victor reported. "Whoever it was knew enough to avoid getting close enough for a clear plate number." "Professional," Dominic said quietly, more to himself than to Victor. "Ferraro," Victor said, voicing the name they had both been avoiding. "This has his signature all over it. He has been looking for an opening for years. If he thinks he has found one, then he has made a mistake he will regret," Dominic finished, his voice hardening into something colder, more dangerous than Victor had heard from him in a long time. "Increased security around the Aldridge. I want eyes on her building at all times, discreet but constant, and find out exactly how much Ferraro already knows." Victor nodded, rising from his chair, though he paused at the door before leaving. "Boss," he said carefully, "if Ferraro is involved, this will not stay quiet for long. He is not a subtle man. If he wants to use her against you, he will not wait patiently for the perfect moment." "I know," Dominic said, his gaze fixed on the dark window, on the city stretching out beneath him, full of danger he had spent years learning to control, and now found himself desperate to keep at bay from someone who had never asked to be part of it. "That is exactly what worries me." Over the following days, Lena noticed the subtle shift in her routine without fully understanding its cause. Victor now drove her to and from every shift, always polite, always careful, never explaining more than necessary. The staff at the Aldridge treated her with even greater deference than before, and twice she caught unfamiliar men stationed quietly near the entrance to her apartment building, men who nodded politely when she passed, but said nothing, their presence somehow both reassuring and deeply unsettling at once. She confronted Dominic about it during a quiet moment near the end of one shift, cornering him gently near the private elevator before he could disappear for the evening. "You have people watching my apartment," she said, not quite a question. "I do," he admitted, without apology. "Why?" she pressed. "What exactly is happening, Dominic? You cannot keep giving me half answers and expect me to simply trust that everything is fine." He studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his careful eyes. And for the first time since she had met him, Lena saw a flicker of genuine uncertainty cross his expression, as though he were weighing how much of his world he was truly willing to let her see. "There are people in this city who would use you to hurt me," he said finally, his voice quiet but absolutely certain. "Not because of anything you have done, simply because of what you have come to mean to me." The words hung in the air between them, more honest than anything he had said before, and Lena felt something shift inside her chest, a mixture of fear and something else entirely, something warmer and far more complicated than she was prepared to examine too closely. "What do I mean to you?" she asked quietly. Dominic did not answer immediately, though the look in his eyes said more than words might have managed. "More than I expected," he said finally. "More than I know what to do with." Neither of them spoke again as the elevator doors opened, carrying him away into the private world she had only just begun to understand, leaving Lena standing alone in the quiet lounge, aware, for the first time with absolute clarity, that whatever was happening between them had already grown far too large to simply walk away from, even if some deep, cautious part of her still believed that walking away might have been the wiser choice. At home that night, Toby noticed the change in her immediately, the way she checked the lock on the door twice before sitting down, the way her eyes drifted toward the window more often than usual, scanning the quiet street below for anything out of place. "Something is going on," he said, setting down his homework and studying her with the sharp, unforgiving attention only a younger brother could manage. "You have been different for weeks. Distracted. And there is a car that parks outside sometimes now, with men inside who do not do anything, just sit there." Lena hesitated, torn between her instinct to protect him from worry and her growing awareness that keeping him blind to what was happening might put him in greater danger, not less. She sat down across from him at the small kitchen table, choosing her words carefully. "The job I took," she said slowly, "is more complicated than I first understood. The man who owns the building, Dominic Rossi, he has enemies, serious ones. And it seems some of those enemies have started paying attention to me because of my connection to him." Toby's face paled slightly, though he tried to keep his expression steady, the same careful bravery Lena recognized from her own reflection on hard days. "Are we in danger?" he asked directly, no longer bothering to soften the question. "I do not think so," she said, though even as she spoke, she was not entirely certain the reassurance was true. "He has people watching out for us, making sure nothing happens. People we do not know," Toby pointed out. "People connected to a world we do not understand, protecting us from danger that only exists because of that same world. Does that not worry you, even a little?" "It worries me every single day," Lena admitted quietly, surprising herself with the honesty of it. "But leaving now would not undo what has already started, Toby. If someone out there has already decided I matter enough to be used as leverage, walking away from my job will not change that. It will only mean I have no protection left at all." Toby said nothing for a long moment, staring down at his hands, the weight of a conversation far too heavy for a 17-year-old settling visibly onto his shoulders. Finally, he looked up, his eyes steady despite the fear still lingering behind them. "Then be careful," he said simply, "and do not shut me out of it. I would rather know what is happening than pretend everything is fine while you carry it all alone." Lena reached across the table and squeezed his hand, grateful, not for the first time, for a brother whose strength so often matched or exceeded her own despite his age. "I promise," she said. Across the city, in the dim, carefully guarded office belonging to Anthony Ferraro, plans continued moving forward with quiet, deliberate patience. Gareth Price stood before his desk, a folder open between them containing everything their people had gathered so far. Lena's daily schedule, the increased security now surrounding her, the routes Victor took to bring her home each night. Rossi has tightened everything around her, Gareth reported. Security at the apartment, an armed driver, cameras added to the surrounding streets. He is not taking any chances. Ferraro leaned back in his chair, considering the information with the calm, calculating patience of a man who had spent decades waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. "That tells us everything we need to know," he said finally. "A man does not build walls around something he does not care about deeply. Rossi has finally shown me his weakness, Gareth. After 10 years of watching him operate without a single crack in his armor, he has finally shown me exactly where to strike." "What is the plan?" Gareth asked. "Nothing rushed," Ferraro said, a slow, deliberate smile forming across his face. "We do not go after her directly, not yet. Direct action against her now, with all that security in place, would be reckless and likely to fail. Instead, we let Rossi believe the threat has passed. We pull back, quiet everything down, let his guard lower, even slightly, and then, when he least expects it, when he believes she is finally safe, we remind him exactly how easily everything he cares about can be taken away." Gareth nodded slowly, understanding the shape of the plan taking form. "And if she gets hurt in the process?" he asked. Ferraro's smile did not waver. "Then Rossi learns a lesson he should have learned years ago," he said simply. "Nobody in this city gets to have something soft and unguarded without eventually paying the price for it." Back at the Aldridge, unaware of the careful patience now being exercised against her, Lena continued moving through her days with a growing awareness that the ground beneath her had shifted permanently, that the ordinary life she once knew, defined by exhausting shifts and careful budgeting and the quiet, private worries of raising a younger brother alone, had folded itself into something far larger and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined possible. She found herself thinking of Dominic more often than she wanted to admit, replaying the honesty in his voice when he had finally answered her question directly, the quiet vulnerability beneath his usual composed exterior. She did not yet understand the full shape of what she felt for him, whether it was genuine affection or simply the disorienting pull of being seen, truly seen, by someone for the first time in longer than she could remember. She only knew that whatever quiet peace had once defined her ordinary life was gone now, replaced by a careful, watchful tension that followed her everywhere, from the moment she woke each morning until the moment Victor's car delivered her safely home each night. And somewhere beneath that tension, hidden but growing steadily stronger with each passing day, was the unsettling certainty that the true danger, the moment everything would finally come to a head, had not yet arrived at all. It was still waiting, patient and unseen, somewhere in the quiet spaces of a city that had already decided, without asking her permission, exactly how her story was going to unfold. The bakery's front window shattered at exactly 6:15 in the evening, glass raining across the display counter where Lena had been arranging a tray of pastries only seconds before, and the scream that tore from her throat was lost beneath the sound of a car engine roaring away down the street, before anyone could catch more than a blur of its dark shape. She had taken the weekend shift at the small bakery near her apartment, the same job she had kept even after starting at the Aldridge, unwilling to give up the extra income or the familiar comfort of a place she had worked for years. The owner, an elderly woman named Margaret Ellison, who had grown fond of Lena over the past 2 years, had stepped into the back room only moments before the window exploded inward, sparing her from the worst of the flying glass, though a thin cut had already opened along Lena's forearm, blood beginning to well up before she even registered the pain. Margaret rushed back into the front room, her face white with shock, and immediately pulled Lena away from the counter, checking her over with shaking hands. "Are you hurt?" she asked frantically. "What happened?" "I do not know," Lena managed, her voice trembling as she stared at the shattered window, at the object now lying among the broken glass on the floor. a heavy stone with a folded piece of paper wrapped tightly around it, secured with a thin rubber band. Margaret called for emergency services immediately, while Lena, hands shaking, carefully unwrapped the note from the stone, unfolding it despite every instinct telling her not to. The message inside was short, typed rather than handwritten, offering no signature, no explanation beyond a single chilling line. Tell Rossi that nothing he protects is truly safe. By the time Victor arrived less than 10 minutes later, alerted by the security detail stationed nearby, who had witnessed the entire incident from a discreet distance and immediately called it in, Lena was sitting on the curb outside the bakery, wrapped in a blanket someone had produced from somewhere, her arm bandaged by a paramedic who insisted the cut, while frightening, was not deep enough to require stitches. Victor knelt in front of her, his usually composed expression cracked with genuine alarm. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for any injury beyond what he could already see. "I am fine," Lena said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed the words even as she spoke them. "Someone threw a rock through the window. There was a note." Victor's jaw tightened as he read the message, his expression darkening into something cold and dangerous that Lena had never seen from him before. "I need to call this in," he said quietly. "Dominic needs to know immediately. He does not need to make this worse," Lena said, though even as she spoke, she understood how naive the words sounded even to her own ears. "This is already as bad as it can get," Victor replied grimly. "The only question now is how he responds to it." Dominic arrived at the bakery within 20 minutes, moving through the small crowd that had gathered outside, with an intensity that made even the onlookers instinctively step back to clear his path. He found Lena still sitting on the curb, and for a moment, the careful, controlled mask he wore for the rest of the world fell away entirely, replaced by something raw and unguarded that made her breath catch in her throat, despite the fear still coursing through her. He knelt in front of her exactly as Victor had, though his hands, when they reached for her, trembled slightly, a detail she would remember long after that night had ended. "I am so sorry," he said, his voice low and rough with an emotion she had never heard from him before. "This is my fault. I should have insisted you stop working here the moment I understood the danger you were in." "This is not your fault," Lena said firmly, surprising herself with the steadiness returning to her own voice as she watched him struggle with a guilt she had not expected to see. "Someone else did this. Someone else chose this. You did not throw that rock, Dominic." He studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his dark eyes, hardening into a resolve that Lena could feel radiating off him like heat. "No," he agreed quietly, "but I know exactly who did." "Ferraro," she said, the name surfacing from memories of overheard conversations, careful references she had caught between Dominic and Victor over the past several weeks that she had not fully understood until this moment. Dominic's expression confirmed it, without a single word needing to be spoken. He helped her to her feet, wrapping his own jacket around her shoulders despite her protests that she was fine, and guided her toward the car waiting at the curb, Victor already speaking urgently into his phone, arranging additional security, coordinating with people whose names Lena did not recognize, but whose urgency was unmistakable even from a distance. "You are staying at my place tonight," Dominic said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And Toby as well. I will not risk either of you being anywhere I cannot personally guarantee your safety." "I need to think about this," Lena started, though her protest lacked its usual conviction, exhaustion and fear having worn away whatever independence she might have clung to under different circumstances. "There is nothing to think about," Dominic said firmly, though his voice softened as he added, "Please, I am asking you to let me protect you, just for tonight, until I understand exactly what Ferraro intends and how far he is willing to go." She nodded finally, too shaken to argue further, and within the hour found herself standing in an apartment far grander than anything she had ever imagined, high above the city, with Toby beside her, wide-eyed and unusually quiet, taking in the sight of armed men stationed discreetly near every entrance. "This is insane," Toby whispered to her once they were alone in the guest room Dominic had arranged for them. "Lena, this is actually insane. People are throwing rocks through windows with threats attached because of you." "Because of us," Lena corrected quietly, gathering him into a tight hug despite his half-hearted attempt to pull away in typical teenage embarrassment. "I am so sorry I brought this into our lives." "You did not bring it," Toby said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "Some terrible man did. Do not apologize for someone else's cruelty, Lena. You taught me that, remember?" She managed a small, watery laugh despite everything, grateful beyond words for a brother whose wisdom so often outpaced his years. Elsewhere in the apartment, Dominic stood in his private office with Victor, the earlier vulnerability entirely replaced now by a cold, focused fury that made even Victor, a man accustomed to violence and danger throughout his career, choose his words with unusual care. "Ferraro has made his intentions clear," Dominic said, his voice deceptively calm, the kind of calm that Victor had learned over the years to recognize as far more dangerous than shouting could ever be. "He wants me distracted, reactive. He wants me to make mistakes born out of fear for her safety." "What do you want to do?" Victor asked. Dominic turned from the window, his eyes hard and absolutely certain. "I want to make sure he understands exactly what mistake he has made," he said. "Ferraro believed that finding something I cared about would give him leverage over me. He needs to understand, immediately and completely, that he has instead given me a reason to finish this permanently." Victor hesitated before speaking again, weighing his next words carefully. "Boss," he said, "if we move against Ferraro directly, this becomes a war, a real one, not the careful positioning we have all lived with for years. People will be hurt on both sides. Are you certain this is the path you want to take?" Dominic's expression did not waver. "He threw a rock through a window with my name attached to it, hoping to frighten a woman who has never harmed a single person in her entire life," he said. "He has already decided this is a war, Victor. I am simply deciding that I intend to win it quickly and end it permanently, so that neither Lena nor Toby ever has to live in fear of another window shattering because of something I built long before either of them existed in my life." "Understood," Victor said quietly, recognizing the finality in his boss's voice, the absolute certainty that meant no further argument would change the course now set in motion. That night, unable to sleep despite the exhaustion pulling at every part of her, Lena wandered quietly out of the guest room, finding Dominic still awake in his office, staring out at the dark city below with an intensity that suggested his mind was working through calculations far beyond her understanding. "You should be resting," he said without turning, somehow aware of her presence before she had made a single sound. "I cannot," she admitted, stepping further into the room. "Every time I close my eyes, I see the glass breaking." He turned then, his expression softening as he studied her, the fear still visible beneath her carefully composed exterior. "Come here," he said quietly, and she crossed the room without hesitation, allowing him to pull her gently into an embrace that felt, despite everything happening around them, like the safest place she had found in weeks. "I am going to end this," he said quietly against her hair, "whatever it takes. Nobody threatens you and walks away from it, Lena, not while I am still breathing." She pulled back slightly, searching his face, seeing past the careful control he maintained for everyone else, seeing instead the raw determination of a man who had already decided, without hesitation, exactly how far he was willing to go to keep her safe. "Just promise me you will not lose yourself in it," she said quietly. "Whatever you have to do. Promise me the man standing here right now is the one who comes back to me when it is finished." Dominic studied her for a long, silent moment, something fierce and tender warring behind his dark eyes. "I promise," he said finally, his voice steady with a certainty she chose, despite every reasonable fear still lingering in her chest, to believe completely. Early the next morning, before Lena or Toby had woken, Victor returned to the apartment with news that made Dominic's expression turn even colder than it had been the night before. The security footage from the bakery street shows the car clearly, Victor reported, laying a laptop open on the desk between them. But more importantly, we traced the route it took afterward. Whoever drove it knew exactly which back streets avoided our cameras. That is not common knowledge, boss. That is information only someone close to our own operation would have access to. Dominic's eyes narrowed. You are telling me someone inside gave Ferraro our blind spots. It is the only explanation that makes sense, Victor said grimly. I have already started narrowing down who had access to that specific information. It is a short list, fewer than 10 people. Then find out which one of them sold us out, Dominic said, his voice dangerously quiet. And find out quickly. Because if Ferraro has someone feeding him information from inside my own organization, then Lena was never as protected as I believed her to be. Not even inside walls I trusted completely. Victor nodded and left without another word, already pulling up names on his phone as he walked, the weight of the coming investigation settling heavily over him. Dominic remained at the desk a long while after he had gone, staring at the frozen image of the dark car on the laptop screen, turning over every possible name in his mind, searching for any sign he might have missed, any moment of hesitation or divided loyalty among the small circle of people he had trusted with his life for years. By mid-morning, Lena found him still there, dark circles forming beneath his eyes from a night spent entirely without sleep. She brought him coffee without a word, setting it gently on the desk before sitting across from him, watching the exhaustion and fury both etched plainly across his face. You have not slept at all, she said quietly. I could not, he admitted. Someone inside my own circle helped Ferraro reach you. I intend to find out who before I do anything else. Lena absorbed this information slowly, feeling a fresh wave of unease settle over her. Someone you trust, she said. Someone I trusted, Dominic corrected grimly. That trust has already cost me more than I am willing to forgive. Over the following 2 days, the apartment became something between a sanctuary and a war room. Victor and a rotating handful of Dominic's most trusted men moving in and out at all hours. Quiet conversations conducted behind closed doors that Lena was not invited to join, though she caught fragments occasionally. Names spoken in hushed, suspicious tones, theories discarded and reconsidered as the list of possible traitors slowly narrowed. Toby, remarkably, adjusted to the strange new rhythm faster than Lena expected, spending his days doing schoolwork at the kitchen table while armed men moved quietly through the halls around him, occasionally striking up brief, awkward conversations with the younger members of Dominic's security detail, who seemed both amused and touched by his easy, unbothered curiosity. It is kind of like living in a movie, he admitted to Lena one evening, only half joking. A scary movie, but still. She managed a tired smile, grateful that whatever fear he carried privately, he continued to hide it well enough to keep both of their spirits from collapsing entirely under the weight of the situation. On the third night, Victor returned to the apartment later than usual, his expression grim as he requested a private conversation with Dominic. Lena, sensing the seriousness in his tone, retreated to the guest room without being asked, though she remained close enough to the door to hear the low murmur of voices without catching the exact words. She learned the details only later, when Dominic finally emerged from his office, his face carved from something hard and merciless that she had not seen from him before, not even in the days immediately following the attack at the bakery. We found him, he said simply, sitting heavily across from her at the small table in the guest room, one of Victor's own men, someone who has worked alongside us for nearly 5 years. He owed money, apparently, gambling debts he kept hidden from everyone, and Ferraro's people found him before we did, offered to erase the debt in exchange for information. Lena felt a chill settle over her despite the warmth of the apartment. What happens now? She asked quietly, though some part of her already suspected the answer would not be simple, nor entirely comfortable to hear. Now, Dominic said, his voice quiet but absolutely resolute, I make certain nobody else inside my organization ever considers betraying the people I care about, whatever price they believe they might gain from it. And then, once that lesson is understood completely, I turn my full attention to Ferraro himself. He reached across the table, taking her hand gently in his, and despite the coldness still lingering in his expression, his touch remained careful, deliberate, entirely unlike the ruthlessness she now understood existed just beneath his controlled surface. "I need you to trust me a little longer," he said quietly. "I know none of this is the life you imagined for yourself. I know you never asked for any part of it. But I promise you, Lena, I am closer now than I have ever been to ending this permanently, to giving you and Toby a life where you never again have to wonder if a car parked outside means danger, or if a knock at your door means the end of everything you have built." Lena studied him for a long moment, weighing the fear still coursing through her against the steady certainty in his voice, the quiet vulnerability she had glimpsed beneath every layer of careful control he wore for the rest of the world. "I trust you," she said finally, surprising herself with how completely she meant it. "Just come back to me when it is finished. Whatever it takes, Dominic. Just come back." He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, lingering there a moment longer than necessary, and Lena closed her eyes, holding on to the fragile warmth of the moment, unaware that the following days would bring the confrontation that would finally decide, once and for all, whether the fragile peace they had built together could survive the war now closing in around them. Outside, far below the tall windows of the apartment, the city continued its restless rhythm, unaware that within its quiet streets, a war was already beginning to take shape, one that would not end until every trace of the threat against Lena had been permanently and completely erased. The phone call came at 2 in the morning, and Dominic was already dressed and moving toward the door before Lena had even fully understood what Victor's urgent voice on the other end of the line had told him. "Ferraro wants a meeting," Dominic said, pulling on his jacket with quick, controlled movements. "Tonight. He says he has something of mine, something he wants to trade." Lena's stomach dropped, a cold wave of fear spreading through her chest. "What does that mean?" she asked, though some part of her already suspected the answer. "I do not know yet," Dominic admitted, his expression tight with barely controlled fury. "But I intend to find out." Toby, who had been asleep, appeared in the doorway of the guest room, rubbing his eyes, immediately sensing the tension filling the apartment. "What is happening?" he asked. "Stay here," Dominic said firmly, though his voice carried none of the coldness the command might have suggested elsewhere, only urgency. "Both of you. Victor will remain with you, along with 2 other men I trust completely. Do not leave this apartment for any reason until I return." Lena crossed the room quickly, catching his arm before he could leave. "Do not go alone," she said, fear sharpening her voice into something almost desperate. "I am not going alone," he assured her, though the grim set of his jaw told her more than his words did about the danger he expected to walk into. "But I need you safe here, Lena. Whatever Ferraro is planning, I cannot focus on ending it properly if I am worried about you being anywhere near it." She wanted to argue, wanted to insist on some role in whatever was about to happen, but the absolute certainty in his eyes told her this was not a moment where her protest would change anything. She pulled him into a fierce embrace instead, holding on for one long moment before finally releasing him. "Come back," she said quietly, the same words she had spoken days before, carrying even more weight now than they had then. "I will," he promised, and then he was gone, disappearing through the door with 2 of his most trusted men flanking him, leaving Lena standing in the quiet apartment with Toby beside her and Victor watching the door with tense, careful attention. The meeting took place in a warehouse near the docks, a neutral location both organizations had used for careful negotiations in the past, though tonight the atmosphere carried none of the practiced formality such meetings usually maintained. Dominic arrived to find Ferraro already waiting, flanked by Gareth Price and several other men, his expression carrying the smug confidence of a man who believed he finally held every advantage. "You look tired," Ferraro observed, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I imagine sleepless nights have become something of a habit for you recently." "Where is she?" Dominic asked flatly, his voice carrying none of the emotion churning beneath his controlled exterior. Ferraro's smile widened slightly, though something flickered behind his eyes that Dominic recognized immediately as uncertainty, quickly masked. "She," he repeated. "I am not entirely certain who you mean." "Do not waste my time," Dominic said, his voice hardening into something dangerous. "Victor's message said you had something of mine to trade. I assumed you meant Lena." For a brief moment, confusion crossed Ferraro's face, quickly replaced by forced confidence, as he attempted to recover his footing. "I have information," he said instead, changing course smoothly. "Information about the man inside your organization who has been useful to me. I am prepared to offer his name, along with a guarantee of peace between our operations, in exchange for certain considerations." Dominic studied him carefully, understanding settling over him with sudden, sharp clarity. "You already lost him," he said slowly. "You do not have Lena. You never did. This meeting is not a trade, Ferraro. It is you trying to salvage something from a plan that has already fallen apart." Ferraro's expression tightened, the confident mask slipping further as he realized how thoroughly Dominic had read the situation. "You think you have already won," he said, his voice sharpening with barely restrained anger. "You think a few extra guards and a locked apartment protect her forever. I can reach her whenever I choose, Rossi. Tonight was simply a test, to see how far you would go to keep her safe." Something in Dominic's expression shifted then, the careful control he had maintained throughout the conversation finally breaking apart entirely, replaced by a cold, absolute fury that made even Gareth Price take an involuntary step backward. "You tested me," Dominic repeated quietly, his voice carrying a dangerous, controlled calm that was far more frightening than any shout could have been. "You threw a rock through a window, endangered an innocent woman who has never harmed anyone in her life, all to test how far I would go." Ferraro opened his mouth to respond, but Dominic continued before he could speak, his voice growing colder with every word. "You have your answer now," Dominic said. "I am prepared to end everything you have built, piece by piece, starting tonight, until there is nothing left of your operation for you to hide behind. You do not get to threaten what is mine and walk away believing you still hold any advantage at all." What happened next unfolded quickly, the careful tension in the warehouse breaking apart as Dominic's men moved with practiced precision. Information gathered over the preceding days finally put into motion, exposing weaknesses in Ferraro's operation that Victor's investigation had uncovered through the captured trader's own testimony. Within the hour, key locations belonging to Ferraro's organization had been compromised, financial networks frozen, alliances he had depended on for years suddenly withdrawing their support as word spread rapidly through the city that Anthony Ferraro's carefully built empire was collapsing from the inside out. Ferraro himself, understanding too late the full scope of what he had provoked, attempted to flee the warehouse before the situation could deteriorate further, only to find every exit already covered by men loyal to Dominic Rossi, men who had been quietly positioning themselves throughout the building since before the meeting had even begun. "It is over," Dominic said simply, standing before him in the quiet aftermath, the warehouse now filled with the tense stillness of a battle already decided. "You made a mistake targeting someone innocent to reach me. Tonight, that mistake ends your ability to threaten anyone ever again." Ferraro said nothing further, understanding finally settling over him as he was led away, his empire dismantled as swiftly and completely as it had once seemed unshakable. Dawn was breaking by the time Dominic finally returned to the apartment, exhaustion etched deeply across his face, though something else lingered there as well, a quiet, hard-won relief that Lena recognized the moment he walked through the door. She rushed to him immediately, checking him over for injury before pulling him into an embrace that neither of them seemed willing to end. "It is finished," he said quietly against her hair. "Ferraro is finished. Nobody threatens you again, Lena. I promise you that completely." She pulled back slightly, searching his face, seeing the exhaustion, but also the steady certainty she had come to rely on, the quiet strength beneath every careful word he spoke. "You kept your promise," she said softly. "You came back." "I always will," he said, and for the first time since the entire strange, frightening journey had begun weeks earlier, Lena allowed herself to believe, fully and without hesitation, that the danger truly had passed. Later that morning, once Dominic had rested and the worst of the exhaustion had eased from his face, Victor arrived with a final update, closing the last details of the night before. The traitor within their organization had been handed over to the authorities, along with enough evidence of his outside dealings to ensure he would face consequences through proper channels. A decision Dominic had made deliberately, choosing accountability over the harsher justice his world might once have demanded. "I thought you would want vengeance," Lena admitted quietly, once Victor had gone, watching Dominic carefully as he sat across from her at the kitchen table, sunlight finally beginning to filter through the tall windows after the long, sleepless night. "I wanted to protect you," Dominic replied simply. "Vengeance would not have accomplished that any better than accountability will. I am trying to build something different than what I inherited, Lena, slowly. It will not happen overnight, but last night felt like the right place to begin." She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers, quietly grateful for a glimpse of the man he was choosing to become, beyond the reputation and fear that had defined him for so long before she had ever entered his life. Toby emerged from the guest room shortly after, still half asleep, but alert enough to notice the shift in the apartment's atmosphere immediately. "Is it over?" he asked, glancing between them. "It is over," Lena confirmed, pulling him into a tight hug that he allowed without complaint this time, some of his usual teenage resistance softened by the exhaustion and relief clearly written across both their faces. Toby glanced toward Dominic, studying him with the same careful evaluation he had shown from the very beginning. "Thank you," he said finally, the words simple but sincere, "for keeping her safe, for keeping both of us safe." Dominic nodded once, something warm passing behind his usually guarded expression. "That is not something you ever need to thank me for," he said. "Protecting the people who matter to me is not a debt you owe. It is simply who I intend to be from now on." In the weeks that followed, life slowly began settling into a new, steadier rhythm. Toby returned to school with considerably more stories to tell his friends than he was permitted to share, though he seemed to relish the secret knowledge all the same, occasionally teasing Lena with knowing looks whenever Dominic's name came up in conversation. The security surrounding their lives gradually eased, though it never disappeared entirely, a quiet, constant reminder of the world Lena had stepped into and chosen, ultimately, not to walk away from. She continued working at the Aldridge, though her role shifted gradually over the following months, Dominic quietly ensuring she was given opportunities to grow beyond simply serving tables, recognizing in her the same sharp intelligence and quiet strength that had first drawn his attention on that ordinary Tuesday night so many weeks before. She began overseeing the training of new staff, her steady, careful manner making her a natural fit for guiding others through the same careful discretion the lounge demanded, and within a few months, Priscilla herself had begun deferring to Lena on matters of scheduling and guest relations, a shift neither of them commented on directly, though both understood exactly what it meant. Margaret, at the small bakery, welcomed her back gradually once the danger had fully passed, insisting on hearing every detail Lena was willing to share, shaking her head in amazement at the strange, unlikely turn her quiet, hard-working employee's life had taken. "You always did have more going on beneath the surface than you let on," Margaret told her one afternoon, handing her a fresh loaf of bread with a knowing smile. "I suppose I should not be surprised it eventually caught someone's attention." Toby, meanwhile, threw himself back into his schoolwork with renewed focus. The strange weeks of armed guards and whispered danger, fading slowly into a story he would occasionally tell close friends, always careful to leave out the details that still felt too private, too significant, to share casually. He began talking more seriously about college applications, and Lena found herself, for the first time in years, able to think about his future without the constant, exhausting weight of financial worry pressing down on every decision, Dominic quietly ensuring, without ever making a show of it, that whatever support Toby needed would always be there. "You do not have to do that," Lena told him once, discovering the arrangements he had made for Toby's education fund, tucked away without any announcement or expectation of gratitude. "I know I do not have to," Dominic replied simply. "I want to. He is part of your life, Lena, which means, if you will allow it, he is part of mine as well." She had not been able to find words adequate enough to respond to that, choosing instead to simply pull him close, grateful beyond measure for a man who had entered her ordinary life so unexpectedly and had chosen, again and again, to protect and nurture it, rather than simply claim it for himself. Their relationship deepened slowly, carefully, built not on the dramatic urgency of danger and rescue, but on quieter moments that followed once the danger had passed. Long dinners at his apartment, where he asked about her day with genuine interest. Quiet mornings where she would find him already awake, reviewing reports at his desk, always pausing to greet her with the same soft, unguarded warmth that had first surprised her weeks before. He introduced her, gradually, to the more legitimate corners of his world, business partners and old friends who greeted her with genuine curiosity, clearly aware that Dominic Rossi did not bring guests into these circles lightly. She never fully lost her wariness of the more dangerous corners of his life, the world of careful alliances and quiet threats that still, occasionally, required his attention. But she came to understand, slowly and with growing certainty, that Dominic himself was working steadily to reshape that world into something less defined by fear, choosing accountability over cruelty wherever the choice was his to make, a change she recognized, with quiet pride, that her presence in his life had helped set into motion. One evening, months after Ferraro's operation had crumbled entirely, Dominic found her exactly where their story had begun, standing near the private booth in the quiet lounge, the same soft music playing gently in the background. He crossed the room slowly, watching her the way he had that very first night, though everything between them had changed so completely since then that the memory felt almost like it belonged to different people entirely. "Do you remember the first time I saw you?" he asked, stopping beside her. "You could not stop staring," she teased gently, a warm smile spreading across her face, "though you tried very hard to hide it." "I was terrible at hiding it," he admitted, a rare, genuine smile crossing his own features. "You danced for 3 seconds, completely unaware anyone was watching, and I could not stop thinking about it for days afterward." Lena studied him for a long moment, remembering every difficult, frightening step that had carried them from that single, unguarded moment to where they now stood, together, having survived a danger neither of them could have imagined that ordinary evening months before. "I am glad the music glitched," she said softly. "So am I," Dominic replied, pulling her close. "More than you will ever fully understand." Outside the tall windows of the lounge, the city continued its endless rhythm, unaware of the quiet, hard-won peace finally settled over two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, and who now, having survived everything the dangerous world around them had thrown in their path, finally allowed themselves to imagine a future built not on fear, but on something far steadier, far warmer, and entirely their own.